So this is one version of the story of how the first bow was ever tied. And once upon a time there were two worms, who actually one two-headed worm. And they went happily along, doing worm things. We all know what worm things are. Until they found something. And it was new and shiny, and they just knew they wanted it. But it wasn't something like this orange that a worm could eat up, nom nom nom, delicious orange. No, that was over there. And they weren't paying any attention to it at all, because this was something really cool and shiny. And they didn't know why they wanted it. They didn't really have a use for it, but they just knew they wanted it. So they climbed under it, and they tried to pick it up, but they couldn't move it, because wrenches are heavy and not made for worms. So they started fighting about it. And Right Worm said, well, if you were just a little bit stronger, then we could have this thing back home to our wormhole by now. And Left Worm said, well, if you were so smart thinking we should pick this up in the first place, then why can't you figure out how to take it home? And they just got into such a big slap fight, and they made a big commotion over it. But it didn't really do much, because they're just floppy worms, and it doesn't really do anything when they slap each other. So they decided they had to take their fight to the next level. And Right Worm decided to wrap over and around Left Worm. And then they really got themselves into a big pickle there, because now they were tied onto this thing that they didn't even know why they wanted. And they couldn't move, and they got so angry about it, and they kept fighting, and eventually they started arching up like cats do, and they hiss to make themselves look big and scary. But this didn't actually scare each other very much, because they were the same worm, so they had to do even more. And Left Worm, who is actually Right Worm, but it doesn't matter because they're the same worm, decided to wrap over and around the Right Worm. And that's how they really got themselves into quite the mess there, because then they got themselves all tightened up, and they just got so angry and they couldn't move at all. But then they realized they had discovered the first bow ever tied. And eventually they both put their heads together and used both their heads and started walking away from this mess they've gotten themselves into with this wrench they didn't want. And it took them a bit of work, but they eventually did get away from this thing that wasn't good for each other at all. And when people heard the story, it kind of became a symbol. So when you give someone a gift, you might tie a bow around it, and it means like whatever's in here, whatever you find, be it an orange or a wrench, it's not worth fighting over, it's not worth having a big battle with yourself over. Or you might even tie a bow in someone's hair with a bow to mean like, no matter what happens, you're worthy of love, even if you don't look the way you think you should, or you don't have the latest iPhone or whatever. You can't just waste your time fighting with yourself or with other people over stuff that just doesn't matter. And that is how the bow was discovered. And I hope you've enjoyed the video and the story of the Battle of the Worms. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care.